Well, like Rachel said, we are in a series on the Psalms, and we are using the Psalms. It's the classic prayer book of the Scriptures to teach us how to pray. It's been teaching normal people for a couple, 2-3 millennia now, and so we figure it might be helpful for us as well. What we have been doing is we've also been reading them together. So would you stand with me, and we're going to go ahead and read Psalm 4 together. You can just follow along and read along with me. Answer me when I call to you, my righteous God. Give me relief for my distress. Have mercy on me and hear my prayer. How long will you people turn my glory into shame? How long will you love delusions and seek false gods? Know that the Lord has set apart his faithful servant for himself. The Lord hears when I call to him. Tremble and do not sin when you are on your beds. Search your hearts and be silent. Offer the sacrifices of the righteous and trust in the Lord. Many, Lord, are asking, who will bring us prosperity? Let the light of your face shine on us. Fill my heart with joy when their grain and new wine abound. In peace I will lie down and sleep. For you alone, Lord, make me dwell in safety. All right, good job. Thanks. Go ahead, have a seat. Today we're going to be talking about 1/3 of your life. 1/3 of your life, you're either sleeping, preparing to sleep, or recovering from sleep, at least 1/3. And I'm going to suggest to you today that God cares about it. His saints have historically cared about it, and they have prayed about it. And it's something that we should take seriously and pray about it. We're going to talk about how we can pray and connect to God in the evenings. Like I said, we're talking about prayer for normal people. And a couple of things, just a little review as to what we've done. You received a card like this when you got here. We're asking you to practice your prayer this summer. Our hope is that as a church, we grow and become a praying church. Grow in our ability to pray personally, grow in the way we pray for our community, grow in our vision of what God might do in our lives through prayer. So you received a little card like this, and it gives you a little bit of a structure for your prayer. Just about anything you want to accomplish or change is going to need some structure. And so we're inviting you to try this summer. 4 little stages to your prayer. Pause, rejoice, ask, and yield. Most of us struggle to pray because we're not able to stop ourselves enough. Pause for just a few moments. Find ways to either read Scripture, to engage God. Slow down enough to pause. And begin with rejoicing. Begin with gratitude and thanksgiving to God. Find ways to celebrate what he's doing in your life. And in the context of the great God that you see, ask in such a way that merits who he is. Ask boldly, ask specifically, ask with his intentions in your mind. Ask according to the deep desires of your heart. And then finally, yield is that simple recognition that just like out of Jesus' prayer, your will be done. A yield to God's will for your life. A yield to your own patience for his answer to that prayer to come in his time. We're talking about some of these things as we go. I want to invite you to do that. On the other side of the card, we've got a simple picture of your neighborhood. Your home is in the middle, and we're inviting you to take once a day to pray for one of your neighbors. We hope that you know all the neighbors that live around you, and you're taking time to pray for them. Jesus said you should love your neighbor. We're not demanding that of you. We're asking you to at least know their name and then maybe pray for them. And this is how we as a people will try to be the people who God has called us to be, where he has called us to be. Now, today, like I said, we're talking about how we connect with God in the evening, how we take seriously 1/3 of our lives, that time when we rest, at least 1/3. And the drama in this psalm starts in verse 1, where the psalmist says, "Give me relief from my distress." Okay? And that's where it starts. The psalmist says, "I have distress, Lord, and I want some relief." I think just about all of us can relate to the psalmist. All right? It's nice to know that we didn't invent stress in the 21st century here. Sounds like, I guess, everybody experiences stress in different ways. All right, but the psalm concludes with this in verse 8. It says, "In peace I will lie down and sleep." Now, that seems simple, but for a lot of people, it really isn't. Sleep is actually a struggle in our society, and more people are struggling with the ability to not just sleep, but to truly rest. I just came across a headline this past week that suggested, that's not just suggested, but that said that 20% of all Americans have been diagnosed with depression. So that means that they've experienced their depression enough to go to a doctor, and the doctor has evaluated them and have diagnosed them with depression and have offered a plan to address that diagnosis. That doesn't count the countless others who haven't gotten a diagnosis yet. Depression coincides with loss of rest. Mental health coincides with a loss of sleep. Oftentimes, many people say that there's causative effects of lack of sleep that drive depression, but also depression makes it difficult to sleep as well. We have a society that has a difficult time resting, and it's a real struggle. For me, it was about 15 years ago, maybe just a little bit less, but it was about 15 years ago, I would say, that I just started waking up in the middle of the night. I would wake up in the middle of the night, and I would have crystal clarity on all the problems in my life. And yet I sat in the dark, and I just felt like I had no comprehension of any of the resources that God had for me. It was like I was alone with every single one of my problems and not a bullet to address any of them. And this started affecting my days. I don't do well when I'm tired. When I'm tired, I'm a total mess. If I'm tired, I'm negative, and everything's going to be bad, and I don't have any hope for anything, right? I'm kind of pathetic when I don't get sleep well, and that started affecting my days. It started affecting my relationships, and I needed to deal with it. And what I realized that it was the fruit of an enormous amount of stuff that God was beginning to work in me to deal with my workaholism and my desire to please everyone around me, my unbridled ambitions, right? And so I had to get in the counselor's office, start dealing with some family of origin stuff. But fundamentally, what I understood is that if I was going to live in the kind of world that I'm living in and live with the kind of personality that God has given me and the kind of ambitions that kind of drive me, I was going to need to learn to walk with God differently. I was going to need to have a different kind of relationship with God. When I first became a Christian, I was taught, hey, why don't you read a chapter of the Bible a day and spend a few minutes praying with him in the morning? And I love that, and it became a habit. It's still my habit, and I still do it, and it's one of the highlights of my day. I love it. But the morning is when I'm all fired up and everything's good, and I've got all these ambitions and idealistic ideas, and I do it, and then I run off in total disconnection with God. I don't know if you've ever had this experience where you can have a moment with God that's meaningful and then go off and live as if he doesn't exist. You go off and live as if you need to figure out all things on your own. You go off living as if it's your ideas. Everything is about you. And as I started realizing I needed to think differently about my relationship with God, I found an art that the saints of history have really developed through the years that had gotten lost in the last several years. It's known as the daily office. It sounds very boring, and in some ways it kind of is boring, but bear with me. It's the opportunity to meet with God regularly throughout the day. If you go to a monastery, the monks will wake up at 3:15 in the morning and they'll have their first moment with God, and then they'll have 6 more chapel services, and where they will come back for the daily office and meet with God. And that's great for them, and I'm sure it's a very inspiring experience, but that wasn't the world I was living in. But I knew that I needed God at more than just one moment a day. And the daily office is simply an opportunity to meet with God in different moments, different appointments that you have with God. I found that what worked really well for me was to have a specific moment where I brought one of my ambitions to God in the morning. And in the early afternoon, I would stop and take an evaluation of God. I'd say, God, search me and know if there's anything anxious in me. Know if there's anything angry in me. Know if there's any resentment in me. Because I found that if I wasn't careful, I'd careen my way through the day. And by the afternoon, I was reacting to what I was angry about. I was reacting to my frustration. I was reacting to this person rather than responding to God and being proactive moving forward with what He's called me to do. Rather, I was dealing with whatever I was upset about here, there, or whatever, right? And I found that if I could stop in the middle of the day, and this, I'm not talking about like some sort of chapel service, it's often a 30-second to 5-minute moment where I could stop, take an evaluation, take stock of who I am before God, draw on His love, draw on an alignment from Him. I can get back and be focused about my day. I bring all of this up because this is embedded in this very psalm. Psalm 4 is a prayer for the evening. And if you're reading the Psalms, you'll know the way they put the Psalms together. The first 2 are just sort of introductions to the Psalms. Psalm 3 is just simple, classic, hey, look, Lord, things are really hard. I need your help, prayer type Psalms. Psalm 4 and 5, in some ways, is like a personal liturgy, where Psalm 4 is a prayer for the evening, and Psalm 5 is a prayer for the morning. And which is curious. You might ask, well, why does it do it this way? Well, what I want to do is I'm going to tell you why, and I'm going to tell you why we can and should take a moment to pray our way through our evening and through our sleep in a meaningful way that I think will shape our lives and set up our lives more appropriately. They'll make a difference in the day. So what I've got is this. I've got 2 whys and 1 how. That's how we can take our evenings seriously, take our evenings in a spiritual manner, pray our way through into the rest that God would give us. All right, so 2 whys, 1 how. The first why is this. All right, first one is we need to see ourselves and our lives upside down. All right, we need to see our lives and ourselves upside down. All right, I mentioned this, that Psalm 4 in the liturgy is this opportunity for the worshiper to come to God in the evening and pray to Him. And then Psalm 5 is the opportunity for the worshiper to come to God in the morning and pray to Him. Sort of like the primitive beginnings of this daily office practice. And you might ask, why does it begin in the evening? Well, every day, according to the ancient Hebrew, starts in the evening. If you don't believe me, go right to Genesis chapter 1. 6 times in Genesis chapter 1, it'll say there was evening and then there was morning the first day. There's evening and there is morning the first day. The Hebrew understanding of the day always begins at sundown. The day begins at sundown and then it ends at sundown. So you might say the day begins at 6 o'clock at night and ends at 6 o'clock the next day. And so if you've ever talked to a Jewish person about the Sabbath, you might think that, well, you might know they celebrate the Sabbaths on Saturday, and so you think, well, Saturday's their Sabbath. No, it actually begins on Friday night. You've always wondered why. Why does it begin on Friday night? Well, because their day begins on Friday night. I've tried to imagine what it would be like for their Google Calendar, right? So I looked up and I found a photo of a Hebrew version of Google Calendar. I don't know if you can see this or not, but there's a couple things you're going to see. Hebrew goes right to left when it comes to their writing, right? And so it goes backwards. But what I was hoping to see is that they would start their days in Google Calendar in the evening, but that's not how they do it, all right? But think about what this would say about your humanity. What does this say about you? What does this say about what it means to be human? If your day really begins around 6 o'clock, that means your day probably begins with maybe a feast. Maybe just a couple of people getting together for a meal. Maybe it's just you preparing a meal for yourself or your family coming together. But it begins with your need for food. It begins with your need for community. It begins with your need for rest. It begins with your insufficiency. It begins with our lack and God's provision. It means our life begins with rest. It means that our life flows from rest. Eugene Peterson, speaking about this psalm, speaks to it, I think, really articulately. He says, Psalm 4 marks the transition from the daylight world in which it is easy to suppose that we are in control to the night world in which we relinquish our grip on jobs, people, even thoughts, and experience the will that is greater than ours. The God who answers previous to our asking, who acts previous to our prompting. The evening is all about our limitations, our insufficiency, and our needs. And your day begins that way. And in many ways, it's the most proper way to relate to God. For me, I love the mornings. I am entirely a morning person. I wake up, I'm ready to roll, I'm ready to rock. I'm all about the morning because the morning's all about possibilities, all about no limits, all the things I could possibly do, right? And I love that time to pray to God because I say, God, I read your word and this is all I'm going to do for you today. And that's really, really exciting. But the evening is like all the things I didn't get done to that day. And oftentimes my to-do list is here and my energy is here. The needs that the demands of my life are here. My ability to meet them are here. My sufficiency is always eclipsed by the demands and challenges of this world, and I experience that most in the evening. That being said, our evenings begin with God's meeting all of those needs for us. Every evening there's food. In the evening, there's the opportunity for community. In the evening, there's the opportunity for rest. And God to meet all of those needs. And when we begin our day, God has already been at work. We're not going out and coming up with a new solution for our world or how we're going to fix things. When we wake up, we have the opportunity to join God with what He's already been doing. When we see ourselves upside down, when we see our days beginning in the evening, it begins with grace. It begins with God's love and God's provision. All right, so that's the why first when it comes to praying through the evening. The why number two is this, that it's really hard to hold a headstand. Has anybody done a headstand recently? All right. It's been a long time, and I may never, ever try it again, to be honest with you, right? It's hard to hold that thing, and it's hard to hold that thing up for very long. But while we were away, we were at a place that had a sort of a community fitness center. And in the community fitness center, they had an inversion table. Have you ever seen an inversion table? It's one of those things where you strap yourself up against the board and then you kind of flip yourself upside down, right? Have you seen that thing? Well, I've heard good things about this thing, and I've got back trouble from time to time. We took a long drive to get here, so I was kind of tight. I'm like, I'm going to try out the inversion table, all right? So sure enough, I walked over to that thing, I strapped myself in, and I flipped myself back, and I thought I was going to die. I mean, for the first 30 seconds, it was absolutely awful. I'm like, all the blood rushed to my head. I thought my eyes were going to bulge out. My sinuses were filling up. It was like I was having a hard time breathing at first. And I was like, all right, I'm just going to hold on. But after about 20 seconds, 25 seconds, I'm like, all right, this is actually kind of cool. I could literally feel the muscles in my back stretching out a little bit. I thought, I'm like, well, I think this is for your vertebrae. I'm assuming they're all getting all lined up. And I'm like in this thing, and I'm like, some folks, when I hear people talk about it, they do 5 minutes a day. I'm like, I'm not going to get crazy because my body's not used to this. I'm just going to do this for 2 minutes, and then I'm going to stop. So after about 2 minutes, I go to pull myself up, and I didn't get up. I went right back down. And then I did it again. And I'm like, I keep going back down. I'm like, oh my goodness. I'm the only one in this fitness center. I might be here forever upside down. My family might come looking for me like 6 hours from now. My eyeballs are going to be lying on the ground because they popped out because I've been here for how much long? I mean, you start wondering about all these things, right? It turns out that what happened, I obviously got out of it, right? I put my feet in the wrong spot. And so the center of my gravity was way too high. And so the center of my gravity was totally holding me back here. And so I had to do some sort of I had to actually use my abs, which hadn't been used in a long time. And I had to pull myself back up without knocking this thing entirely down, right? It's hard to live upside down. It's hard to look at ourselves in this different way. We live in a world where what you look like is what is true about you. What you accomplish is how you are measured. We live in this world that measures you on all these morning, daytime metrics, right? But we live with these evening realities about who we are. It's really difficult to root ourselves into the truths of grace when everything in the world shouts perform. It's hard to measure ourselves about what's on the inside when the world says what's really going on is on the outside. Hard to hold a handstand. It's hard to stay in the inversion table. And for me, I have found that it's difficult to stay engaged in the evenings. I've joked before that sometimes around 4:30 in the afternoon, I just run out of decisions. I'm out of decisions, right? And so I get stressed out about what am I going to watch on TV? Or I get stressed out about any other decisions because I feel like I've used them all up for the day, right? Or sometimes I just run out of physical energy and it's hard to stay engaged. The temptations are to numb out, to check out, to give up, or to give in. Because we come up against our own limitations. In the psalm, the psalmist talks about 3 specific things that hit him in the evening. He talks about how he's conflicted. He talks about, God, give me relief from my distress. We don't know what the specific distress is, but it really is good. And it's just helpful for us to know that stress isn't just sort of like this North American 21st century thing. Every culture experienced stress. Every human experienced stress. And stress is relative, right? A 5-year-old can get way more stressed than you over things that would never stress you out, right? But it's stressful to that 5-year-old. Stress is relative to every single person, and it's common to every single person. So every one of us is going to face stress in a variety of ways, but in particular, the evenings is when we feel it more than anything else. Because the illusion of daytime and the many, many hours that we have to address the things that stress us out is over, right? Because we realize that we gave it all the best we got all day long, and it's still there. The problem is still there, and we don't have the physical, mental, maybe emotional, or even spiritual energy to address it, it is still there. And we can't keep ourselves busy with whatever over here. We're just alone with it. It's in the evenings when the illusions of our control are gone, and we have to look at it for what it is. The psalmist is conflicted, but the psalmist also had to deal with their comparisons, right? Because you'll see in the first few verses, he talks about those who are worshiping idols, and he's managing the other people around him. And you see that in the latter part of the passage. He's dealing with, will anybody bring us prosperity? There's these comparisons, and there's the managing of the other people around us. And for us, if you're human, you're going to struggle with comparisons, right? And there's always somebody who's got a bigger version of what you have. They have a better version of what you have. They have more, or they might have something newer. They might just be stronger, smarter, better, further along. And we never compare ourselves to those who have less than us. We seem to always compare ourselves to those who have something better than us. And we continue to find ourselves lacking because the comparisons come hit us in the evenings. When we can't be busy with the work, we're alone with our conflicts, and we're alone with our comparisons, and we're alone with our contempt. The psalmist says, tremble and do not sin. Other versions say, be angry and do not sin. We're alone with our anger in the evenings, with our frustrations. And you might say you're not angry, but I see what's posted on social media. The dumbest things are posted in the evenings. That's when we leak our anger on the people around us. Maybe we leak our anger on our family members. Maybe we leak our anger on social media. Or we reach to alcohol to address our anger, or we find some other way to numb ourselves from these disappointments. It's in the evenings when we're most vulnerable to these things. The saints historically have not allowed the evenings to be a time for ourselves to fail. They've learned to pray their way through the evenings, to pray their way through these vulnerable moments in the darkness. And so that's point number 3 on how. How do we move from stressed to rest? The psalm has 6 words right at the center of it. I'll walk us through them 2 at a time. It says, be angry and do not sin, or tremble and do not sin. The evening is when we're most vulnerable to our anger. It's because our lives have been undone, and maybe they've undone us. We feel and see our disappointments, and it's tempting to be in denial, to say we're not angry, but if you're not angry, are you really paying attention? If you're not angry, if you don't have disappointment, are you really human? To be human is to experience disappointment. To have the ideals of your faith is to experience the frustration of how far our own lives and our world fall short of those things. The Bible is tremendously realistic about life. It realizes you're going to be angry, but it still continues to hold us to a high calling. You cannot allow the anger to overcome so that you fall into sin and leak that on the people around you, or leak it onto your own life. So what do? We admit it. We own the fact that we're angry. We own the disappointments of our evenings. But what does the psalmist call us to do? It says, the second 2 words of this, search your hearts and be silent. He says, get in your bed, search your heart and be silent, which sounds like total punishment, right? When I was a kid, like, go to your room and think about this thing, right? But the mature embrace the opportunity to be quiet. The mature are not afraid of the silence. And I think this is actually going to be one of the defining features that separates a mature person from the immature in our age of technology, because we have 1,000 ways to distract ourselves. We have 1,000 ways to fill our minds and fill our environment with sounds and noises and images that could distract us. But the mature are going to be able to sit and be in the silence. It gives us that opportunity to be authentically ourselves before God. Eugene Peterson spoke about this. I just want you to hear how he thinks about this and how he speaks to it. It says, in that moment when you're on your bed, embracing the silence, he says, do this. Speak to yourself. Listen to yourself. In the crossfire of daytime voices, we become strangers to ourselves. Get acquainted again with the being that God created. Not just the passport version that you have used to get more or less successfully through the day. And be silent. Nothing more needs to be said. No explanations. No boasts. No apologies. This is who you are. There's something more important than liking or not liking yourself. More significant than today's accomplishments and failures. There is you. In the silence, simply be the person that God is gathering into salvation. We reach for the distractions. We reach for the things that can keep us in denial because we're afraid of simply being ourselves. Seeing ourselves for who we are before God. And can I invite you to see this as something tremendously positive? Remember, it's in the evening where we don't have the illusions of presenting to God all that we accomplished and all that makes us worthy of Him. It's in the evenings where we have this vulnerability to come before God and to be embraced by His love. To be known that we are loved not for what we have accomplished throughout the day. We are loved because we are His children. To be embraced by Him for who He has made us to be. Not what we want to project ourselves to be. Not avoid Him because of the regrets of what we wished we would have been. To be simply who we are and to be, like Peterson says, gathered into the salvation of His love. It's in the evening when we are vulnerable, but it's in the evening when we can experience the love of God, to know our value, to know we matter, not because of our accomplishments, not because of our talent, not because of our sufficiency, but to know our value because we stand and we lie in the loving presence of God. We can search our hearts and be silent, gathered in to the loving embrace of God. And the last two words at the center of this psalm that enables us to rest, to enable us to get to the rest that's beneath the physical rest. He simply says this: offer right sacrifices and trust the Lord. The version we read said this: offer the sacrifices of the righteous and trust in the Lord. When we are ourselves, we know how to sacrifice. All of life is a sacrifice. My father-in-law says that life is a series of trade-offs, right? We are all sacrificing. You could be at brunch now, but you sacrifice that to be here, right? But it's in the bed when we know who we are before God. We can know how to live that life next and trust God. And we lie in rest. We lie in peace, knowing that God has all things. God is sufficient for our life. God is sufficient for our weaknesses. God is sufficient for our vulnerabilities. God is sufficient for our provision. God is sufficient for our salvation. God is sufficient for all things. God is sufficient for our depression. God is sufficient for our fears. God is sufficient for all these things. And then we lie in peace and trust and rest. And then we wake up and join him in what he is doing. We won't get it all done, but we'll get to come back to feast, to rest, to trust again in the evening. And that's how we pray our way through the evening. Let's pray.